This is the Wannabe Saints podcast, where we take virtues and try to break them down so they become tangible and applicable to your life.
We aren't here to bring you advice, we're here to bring you virtue. I'm Jordan.
And I'm Rachel.
We're your hosts,
and this is Wannabe Saints. Welcome back to Wannabe Saints. Tonight we have with us my brother-in-law, Chris Plance.
Clapping on my cup.
Thank you, Chris, for joining us tonight. And so before we dive into our topic and let the people know what we're talking about, just introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me on. Hey, everyone. I'm Chris, and as Rachel said, I am her brother-in-law, and I teach theology at St. Monica Academy in Los Angeles. It's a classical Catholic school out there. I grew up in Los Angeles. I made my way out to Franciscan University to do my master's in theology, and that's where I met Rachel's sister, Becca. And we married. I eventually worked a little bit in San Diego as the director of evangelization and mission for John Paul the Great Catholic University for a few years, and I eventually wound up back in LA where I teach right now. I have 6 kids. Number 7's on the way. Been married 11 years. I am a theology nerd, a Bible nerd, and I love talking about precisely all the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight. I have a YouTube channel. It's just Christopher Plance, where I talk about a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight. So the social kingship of Christ, politics, theology, a little bit of apologetics, and stuff like that. So I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. We'll link all of Chris's stuff in our show notes so that people can find you. So with that, tonight we are discussing with Chris the virtue of justice, just because, like he mentioned, the guy knows a lot about the Bible, knows a lot about church teaching, and knows a lot about politics and how politics should function, is my understanding. I am not the expert here on that stuff, but
Definitely not. He's like next level educated in this.
Yeah. So it'll be a good learning lesson tonight, even just for the two of us.
Yes.
So, but to get us started, as always, I'll just share with everyone the definition of the virtue of justice. So, the virtue of justice is the moral virtue that consists in the constant and firm will to give their due to God and neighbor. And it is one of the 4 cardinal virtues. So, just a little ad lib, like I said, Chris is the expert here, but you are giving people what is owed to them. So, great example is your parent, right? Because they gave you life, you owe them respect and honor.
Yeah.
So that's always an easy example that I know of.
Yeah, and it's in the 10 Commandments, which is nice.
For sure.
Yeah.
It's the one everyone knows.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
You know, honor your parents. And that's really the best place to begin, because justice, I'll explain to my students, is largely determined by your relationship with somebody. So it's always directed at another person. That's an easy way to think about it. You're giving another person what is their due. And you have all the names in the catechism and in the Catholic tradition, like commutative justice and distributive justice and legal justice and all these different kinds. But suffice to say, those are all just words that we use to describe the different kinds of relationships that we're in. And so justice is largely determined by the relationship that you're in with somebody. So your parents, and not another person's parents, just by virtue of them being your parents, are owed something that somebody else's parents aren't owed, because you're in a different kind of relationship with them.
Well, and that's where Aquinas talked about the virtue of justice being the crown of all virtues, because to practice the virtue of justice, or to form this virtue well in your life, it's not only personal holiness, it's outward. Like you're treating others.
Yeah.
It's causing you to not only look at yourself,
Yeah.
and you're forced to look at others, which is also where that ties in charity.
It's a really good way to put it. Yeah. it makes you go out of yourself
Mm-hmm.
to think about others. Like, what do I owe
Mhm.
somebody? Yeah, and what you said, like, it is the crown of the virtues, and all of the cardinal virtues, all of the virtues depend on those 4 hinge virtues. Cardinal just means hinge.
Mm-hmm.
So everything, all of your actions depend on you being prudent, having the virtue of temperance, having the virtue of fortitude, but all of those are for the sake of justice. So prudence, the virtue of gathering all the facts and figuring out what's the best decision. Temperance, what is the best way to go about reaching this decision in the right way, the best way possible. Fortitude, the virtue of, if there's an obstacle in the way to me making this decision, me performing this act, I can overcome that, all for the sake of justice. Right? So prudence, temperance, fortitude, all for the sake of justice. So all of the virtues are just these inner habits of the soul, these strengths of the soul, virtues, strengths that you build up so that you can give others what is their due. So I like what you said. Like, we work on ourselves so that we can give others, but ultimately God what is his due, since that's the first commandment, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When I was reading about Aquinas and his teachings on justice, it talked about how, charity perfects justice, because giving someone their due is only complete, he said, when it's motivated by love.
Mm-hmm.
So true justice, the virtue of justice, can't be done without charity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it has to be for the sake of the other and not for you.
So it's just interesting, because when you hear the word justice, you often are like,
Fight.
yeah, like, it's like, you know, give me what is right, give me what is equal. And I think in society, we often, justice is
warriors.
like, yeah,
it's
like,
it's more about me, not about everyone.
And what I am owed, what people owe me, that's justice.
That's a good way to put it.
You know, or talking about like equal rights, justice, like that's justice. But tonight, like, that's by breaking this virtue down is important, because the concept of today's justice, like, that meaning is lost.
Yeah.
And because if you said to someone, charity goes hand in hand with justice, they'd be like, what? What do you mean it goes hand in hand? And I think another example of how that is true is in parenting. You know, you discipline your child in just ways, not out of you're annoying me and you're wrong and you're this. And if you're parenting well, like, you're doing it out of love. You're telling the kid no to touching the outlet because you're protecting them from what would hurt them more.
Yeah.
Right? So it's you're telling them no, not to be rude to them, but to protect them, to love them.
Yeah.
So
it's good.
Yeah.
It's good.
So just to preface this episode a little bit more, we always say we have no idea where this conversation is going to go, but my ideas for talking on this tonight is hitting on justice in society and politics, hitting justice in the church and what that looks like, not only in a personal relationship to God, but also to the whole of the church. Like, what does it look like to worship in justice with the charismatic movement that is so strong and the traditional movement that is so strong?
Yeah.
And like, why are we not feeling united, but kind of seeing the justice on both sides? Why are both sides right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, in that idea. And then talking on just justice in relationships, parenting, children, marriage, friendship, even your enemies. And then, okay, how do you practice this even in your daily life? I just said about how there's like a misinterpretation of what it is. How does that look, trying to now live that out in your day-to-day life to cultivate this virtue of justice? So that's kind of where my head's at with all that. But
yeah, so I think we should step back and consider a couple points.
Mm-hmm.
First, how pervasive this topic, justice, like, encompasses everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you wake up in the morning out of justice because you have to work. Someone is owed, you know, you owe somebody to be at work at a certain time,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you're styling hair, someone's paying for it, and so you owe them the highlights or whatever.
I owe them that
Right.
service. Yeah.
Exactly. And they owe you. So that's
Yep.
commutative justice, what we owe individuals, right? Everything we do is ordered to justice precisely because we're in community. We're meant to be in community. And of course, as I said earlier, that's going to look different, right? We don't pledge allegiance to a foreign nation. We properly pledge allegiance to America because we realize we owe something to America that we don't owe to another nation. If Mexico goes to war, we don't owe Mexico our very lives. If the United States goes to war, then you, in the order of justice, you have to lay down your life for your country to defend your country because your country has given you stuff that you know, it's in one of those categories for Aquinas that there are three things. So giving others their due is pretty, like, in a strict sense. There's a strict sense to that, right? You do my hair, I owe you $100 or something like that. But there are some relationships, three of them in particular, that Aquinas thinks that you can never pay back. So there's another sort of thing that's owed. So your parents gave you life. So Aquinas thinks that you actually can't pay that back. There's no amount of money. There's nothing you could do. And so you owe them honor. And that's a unique way of showing them that, you know, they taking care of them in their old age, helping them, being generous to them, respecting them, all those sorts of things. Patriotism is what you owe your country because you can't pay it back for all of the goods and services that it offers you. And then also God himself, right? And that's religion, the virtue of religion, which is giving back to God what is owed you. It's a natural virtue. So it's not a supernatural virtue. So just giving thanks and praise back to God, some form of prayer, some sort of sacrifice or something, giving back to him, recognizing him. That's the natural form of religion. It's not the supernatural form of religion we call Catholicism, established by God. But anyway, so the first point is just that justice pervades all of our lives. It basically defines all of our actions. The second thing is it frames the entire story of Scripture. Basically, if we can go back all the way to the beginning, because I think this is the best way to sort of begin.
Mhm.
But if we
Yeah,
go back
yeah,
to
go
the
to
very beginning, God created the world and created man in his image and likeness. And with that image and likeness came a specific vocation, as he says, to rule and have dominion and govern his creation on his behalf, to be in his image. And when Adam and Eve rebelled, what ended up happening is there was something that was owed to God by virtue of being in his image that they denied to him. And that is obedience. Just like you obey your parents. It's one of the ways that you show honor to them. So when they fell, basically the rest of the story of the Bible is how God can restore that human vocation to rule and govern his good world on his behalf, and how he can dwell with man. But that relationship, because justice was broken, it was denied him, the relationship is broken. Hey, you said you were going to do this? You said you were going to be there on Christmas Eve. Or, hey, you said you were going to, show up on this family vacation and you didn't. Or, or this was owed to me. This kind of respect was owed to me and you didn't show me that respect. And so the relationship is broken. So the whole point of the Bible comes down to the outer frame of it is how can God restore this relationship with humans so that we can rule and govern his creation accordingly. In the book of Romans, which is a very difficult book to kind of get at, Paul talks about the dikaiosune theo, the righteousness of God. And that dikaiosune in Greek is just justice. It really just refers to the justice of God. The justice of God. And what's so interesting is for a while, since Martin Luther and John Calvin and many in the Protestant tradition understand the dikaiosune theo, the righteousness of God, as the moral status of God, that he has never sinned. He has this moral status. And we have this moral status that's unrighteous. We're not righteous. And so what God does to us is the righteousness of God is really a righteousness from God. So there's a tricky how to translate dikaiosunne theo, where Protestants will translate it the righteousness from God. And Catholics and more literal scholars will translate it what it is, which is the righteousness of God. So the righteousness from God for like Luther and Calvin and the Protestants is the moral status of God, of Jesus, that he imputes to your account so that when you go before the divine judge, I have a perfect moral status. But what the righteousness of God is a righteousness of God to his covenant promises. That's what it is. It's not like a moral status. It's God made certain promises to Abraham after the Tower of Babel that he would establish through Abraham's seed a worldwide family that will worship him and honor him and be a light to the nations and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
It would consist of all of the nations. When you get to the New Testament, the question that is that the thing we call the four gospels are trying to answer is, has God actually been faithful to that promise? Okay, 10 of the northern tribes are scattered. The Jews are in the land that they don't really occupy, but God promised them in Genesis 12. But the whole point of the land promised to them was so that in the third promise he gave them, they would be a light to the nations and reunite the scattered tribes that had just been scattered the chapter before in Genesis 11. So Abraham's the means to reuniting the nations. The problem is the nations aren't united. If anything, they're united or under the Roman Empire. The nations have been united under this massive Roman Empire. Caesar seems like he's the fulfillment of that promise, not the Jews and Abraham's seed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Jesus shows up on the scene announcing this gospel that's going to go out to the nations and unite the nations. In this, by the end of the first century, it's called the Catholic Church. And this is why Paul says that we are the righteousness of God. So it's kind of hard to figure out, but how do we become the justice of God? And the best way to look at it is this way. It's not that we share in Jesus's moral status, right? He kept the law perfectly. He never sinned. And so now he gives us that righteousness, a righteousness from Jesus. And now we're considered perfectly righteous. And so we don't have to, our account is clean, even though we're a sinner. As Luther said, I'm a just and I'm a sinner. And I have Christ's righteousness in me. But really, what Paul is talking about there is we are the justice of God. Then all of the nations united in the Catholic Church, you look at this thing we call the Catholic Church, proves that God had kept his promise to Abraham, right? And so God has this relationship with Abraham that's very unique. And at the heart of the New Testament is about the justice of God fulfilling that promise that he made to Abraham. So I just want to point out that at the heart of the thing we call the Bible and at the heart of the thing we call all of our human experiences is this topic of justice. And it sits right in the middle of all of the readings from our Sunday when we go to Mass. That the question is whether or not God has remained faithful to his covenant promises or not. And moreover, if he established a covenant relationship with all of creation, as Genesis 1 and 2 describes, then he has subjected creation, as Paul says in Romans 8, in hope, precisely because he promises to restore creation. And that's what he does. Jesus' resurrection on the first day of the week is a signal flare that the new creation is emerging from within history. But what he plans on doing at the end when Jesus comes back is the restoration of all creation and his fulfillment in fulfillment of his promise that creation is good and that he's going to restore it, even though it's been hijacked by the dark powers. So anyway, that's just the outline of the Bible. Now,
So you're saying that like when Jesus comes again will be the final fulfillment of his promise to Abraham.
right. Well,
Yeah.
he's already fulfilling that promise.
Yes.
Okay. So what I think's happening, say in the Gospel of John, is that there's this thing called the heavenly court room, the divine council. And not a lot of people know about it, but it's actually all over the New Testament. It's sort of Old Testament and New Testament, where there's like a courtroom before God, the judge, right? Daniel has the vision of the holy ones, the saints.
Mm-hmm.
And Satan, the picture that we get of Satan is that he's sort of like he's an attorney. Like in the book of Job's a perfect example, right? Where Satan approaches God after roaming the earth and saying, I've got a case against this guy named Job, and I think that he loves you only because you give him a bunch of good things. And God disputes it. As judge, he thinks, I think you're wrong. And so they put Job to the test, and God ends up winning his case.
Yeah.
So what seems to be going on in the Old Testament is there, and then in the New Testament as well. This is what Jesus means by he's going to testify to the Father. And the Father says, yes, you have testified, you will testify again. What is he testifying to? It seems that Satan has actually brought a charge against the judge himself, against God the Father. So there's a dispute taking place in the divine council, the heavenly courtroom, where God had made certain promises to Israel, to Abraham, and they're not coming true. And so what the accusation that's being leveled against the Father is that you said you were going to create a one worldwide kingdom to unite all the nations that were scattered in Genesis 11 through Abraham's seed. That was the promise of Genesis 12.
Mm-hmm.
You never did that. And actually, the people that you chose have now been exiled. They're not even in the land. And 10 of the tribes are completely lost. They're scattered among the nations. And so Satan is bringing a case against the Father and saying that you have not kept your promise. This is where you get the pre-exilic and post-exilic prophets. The prophets are attorneys. They're God's attorneys. And they don't know how God's going to end up doing it. But they're saying, no, the exile, the reason why it hasn't happened is because of your sin.
Mm-hmm.
So they're making the case, it's not because God is weak and God can't fulfill his promises. Isaiah's
we keep messing up.
We keep messing up, so we keep going in exile.
Yeah.
So God can't use Israel to be a light to the nations when Israel keeps not being a light to the nations, ends up being evangelized by the nations, ends up mimicking the nations. So that's a problem. But the bigger problem is that this Satan has leveled, he's the accuser, right? He accuses the brethren day and night. We hear from the New Testament. He's accusing God. And so the Son comes to testify to the Father's faithfulness. But he comes as the seed of Abraham, as the dikaiosune theo.
Mm-hmm.
Christ is the righteousness of God because in him you have the Abrahamic seed, and in Christ you have what we now call the Catholic Church, but it's the union of all of the nations together in the one worldwide family of Abraham. And so that's why we are the righteousness of God. We are the evidence. The Catholic Church is the proof. It's evidence A that's brought by Jesus to this courtroom dispute that Satan is wrong.
Yeah.
So Satan loses in the end because the Father ended up keeping his promises in and through Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's kind of the framework. Now, from where we stand, God made promises to Abraham, but if we are the ones that are now having our images renewed in Christ, as Paul says, we then share in his glory and his reign. And that means properly doing the thing that Adam and Eve didn't do and our ancestors didn't do.
So we owe that obedience still in order to...
Yes. We owe obedience to the King.
Mm-hmm.
That God is the ruler over the world. So this is where if you can get all of this, you're on your way to making sense of why Jesus' first words when he comes back from the dead is all authority on earth has been given to me. It's like out of the blue. It's like, what is that all about? What do you mean all authority on earth has been given to me? So there's a lot more off to the side that we have to shelf for now as to why he says that. But suffice to say, as Pius XI said, and I want to read it here in a little bit, but I'll kick it back to you before I do. There is obedience that is owed to Christ by all individuals and nations. That's the tricky part. And that makes American Catholics very uncomfortable. It's our ancestors in the faith sort of assumed this. He's like, yeah, Christ is God. He's been given all authority. Therefore, the state, Constantine, everybody else should recognize, that he's the king and that this is his kingdom on earth. But it's kind of gotten lost. And that's why this whole topic of justice, what is really owed to Christ? Like, is Christ, the popes, during the end of the 20th century, at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, they made clear that it is not just, it's not fair to use Trump's, Trump is always talking about what's fair. That's not fair. They're not, they treated me very unfairly. Trump always talks about that. The person who's being treated unfairly, as the Pope said, is Jesus of Nazareth. Because when you have a political system that basically claims neutrality, the state of Illinois has decided to treat Jesus and Muhammad and Buddha and all of these other religions as equal. They all deserve the same equal. The state is not gonna legislate anything in favor of Christ and his church or anything. And the popes have said that that's a radical injustice. That's precisely what the Bible's trying to overturn, which is that these idols and these false gods are not owed something. They're not owed the same thing as the creator God and the person that he has crowned king, Jesus of Nazareth, right? So Jesus has been given all authority on earth. That means he's owed obedience. If someone's elected president of the United States, they're owed obedience and respect. They have all these different things. So there's something that's owed to them. We have a duty. And so we have a duty as a society, as a nation, as a state, as a community, as a home, as individuals, within our own hearts, allegiance to Christ, the King. It's the ultimate form of justice. It's more fundamental than the right to life. It's more fundamental than the right to life. We have all these organizations that are doing the March for Life, all that stuff. That's really important, and we should still do that. But more important are the social rights of Christ the King than merely the social rights of the right to life for all of us, including the unborn. Precisely because, as the Pope said, the reason why we all have this dignity is because we're made in the image and likeness of God. The eternal image of God is Jesus Christ. The eternally, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. So if he's denied social rights, in the beginning it was with God, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said that so fast.
It was so fast.
Yeah. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. There was nothing that wasn't created through him. See, we talk about politics, but fundamentally what it's about is about creation. It's about creation and justice. So think about this. Try reading this and saying, yeah, we could totally bracket Jesus out from his creation. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him. Right? So if you're outside and you make a painting, right? You're like painting something, and someone comes up and just takes it. They're like, that's mine. I was like, what are you talking about? I did the...
I just did that.
I just did that. I even made, you see all these DIY like things online. It's like, here's how you create a basket, or here's how you build like a roof or whatever. And then someone just comes along and they just take it. It's like, wait a second, that's ours, And that's the question. That's the question of justice, right? Russia's attacking Ukraine because they believe something is theirs, right? It's injustice. America is like, we've been ripped off. We are owed more because of the security we guarantee and blah, 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 blah. But think about this. All things were made through him. So he owns everything. Now, this is if this whole Catholic thing is true. If it's not, then whatever. But if it's all true, then this is quite the political statement. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it or understood it. But this idea that all things were made it through him, he is the image of the invisible God, as Paul says. And we are being conformed to his image means that we are under strict obedience to render justice to him, societally and not just privately in our hearts. And I did a podcast response to like Lila Rose and Chris Stefanik because, within like a couple weeks, they had both posted on social media They're like, what Christ the King is really about is that he's king of our hearts. He's not like a political king. And so in my responses to them, I brought up that that's not actually allowed. That's over.
He is a political
He's a political,
king.
he's a king in the strict sense, Pius XI says, Leo XIII, Pius X, Benedict XV. They've all, I mean, think about it. They're all popes at the collapse of Christendom that for over 1,000 years, it was recognized that he had strict rights, as Christ the King. So, I mean, it's just.
No, I love it. I love how passionate you are about it too.
Yeah.
Woo!
So I just want to I'll read this and then we can move on to the other stuff. But
no, like this is a huge part of what you're all about right now. So
no, and I love it.
It's something that if people heard you say, oh, Christ is king and a political, like he is and should be part of politics. They're like, whoa, dude.
Yeah.
Hold up a sec.
Yeah.
You're crazy.
Yeah.
That's not a thing.
Yeah.
So no, like diving into this and sharing as much as you want, I'm totally good with.
I love it.
I think it's a perspective that is not heard of anymore.
I agree.
Like you already know.
Is that because of what you were saying then? Society has like tried to remove his crown. Is that what you were mentioning earlier?
Well, I mean,
I don't know what you were saying to me earlier. I think you're
saying the Archbishop Lefebvre, they have uncrowned him because the SSPX, one of the doctrines that the SSPX Archbishop Lefebvre was concerned about was the social kingship of Christ doctrine, which is a teaching of the church. And he believed that Vatican II undermined that, but it didn't at all. Dignitatis Humanae clearly states that this document, this teaching of religious liberty, does not reverse or undermine or touch upon the traditional Catholic doctrine of the duties of states and nations to the one Church of Christ and the true religion.
Mm-hmm.
It was just talking about something else, that another thing that Leo XIII is developing, because if the state doesn't recognize Christ as king, it loses rights. It has a kind of borrowed power from the church if it recognizes the church as God's kingdom. So it's just that now that if a state does not recognize Christ, they lose privileges. And the church doesn't recognize them as having certain privileges if they don't recognize their king, the divine king. Anyway, but I kind of, there are a bunch of different ways to go about talking about this because it's hard for especially American Catholics. We've been sort of brainwashed to think of the church and state as separate because of a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptists. But I always remind American Catholics in particular, that even our Protestant founders were totally fine with the specific colonies having official religions, the early states having official religions. They all had, for the most part, like 8 of the first ones had official religions. It's only recently that they've kind of reversed that. So there's the question of the actual history of America, because the First Amendment, what about the First Amendment? Separation of church and state. The First Amendment is only talking about Congress shall not establish an official religion. Congress is the federal government. So the federal government cannot establish an official state religion because the states are supposed to determine their own religion themselves, right? Which is what Muslims are trying to do in like Michigan and Minnesota. And constitutionally, if Muslims do it, they're gonna, and someone sues and they're like, wait, I thought we were separation of church and state. If you have a bunch of judges on the Supreme Court that are originalists, they're going to be like, well, I mean, we were founded as a Christian nation, but there's nothing in the Constitution. The First Amendment only protects the states from the federal government, but the states can decide on their own. Anyway, so put all that aside because that's really not the important point. What really matters is actually the church's teaching here and the framework around it called the biblical story. But listen to so in 1925, Pope Pius XI announces that he is going to put at the end of the liturgical calendar the final feast of Christ the King. That's the final feast that we celebrate before the end of the liturgical year, right? And the point is, he wrote this encyclical called Quas Primas, and it's just Latin for first things. So it's like first things first. And it's all about the establishment of the feast of Christ the King. And he saw the writing on the wall, Leo XIII did, Pius X. They all saw that France, Germany, United Kingdom was gone. Russia, like all of Italy, Spain, even. And then finally, in about 6 years from when he writes this, what he'll say, our dear Mexico. He calls our dearest Mexico has fallen because remember the Cristero War, where Mexico wanted the people wanted Mexico to remain a Catholic country. Christ is king. They wanted in their constitutions, we are a Catholic country. And the Marxists were able to get a foothold and say, no, we want a separation of church and state. And once Mexico falls, then basically you have like Malta, maybe Luxembourg still, but they're all like just Catholic in their constitutions and really name only. But France, the eldest daughter of the church, no longer is an officially Catholic country. And so the reason why I say all this is because the doctrine has been taught, he says, in this encyclical. But the fact is it's not getting through Catholics like in their minds and hearts. And he says the best way, as the church has always done, if you want to finally let a dogma of the church or doctrine sink into the heart of the people, you give them a feast day. Because nothing is more powerful than the liturgy. It's where the doctrine comes to life. So he establishes this feast day of Christ the King, right? But he said it's only going to work if you bishops teach your people what it really means. And then he says what it means. And it's like, it's good stuff. It means the social kingship of Christ. But listen to what he says here because it ties into the justice thing. I'll only read this paragraph, but I would love to just sit here and just read the whole thing. But he says this. So he says, the foundation of this power and dignity of our Lord is rightly indicated by Cyril of Alexandria. Christ, he says, has dominion over all creatures, a dominion not seized by violence nor usurped his essence, but by his essence and by nature. Close quote. He says, his kingship is founded upon the ineffable hypostatic union. 100% human, 100% God. That's why he's a strict king. He's not just the creator who deserves all honor and worship, but he's also strict king because he's a human, 100% human.
Mm-hmm.
From this, the hypostatic union, it follows not only that Christ is to be adored by angels and men, but that to him as man, angels and men are subject and must recognize his empire. By reason of the hypostatic union, Christ has power over all creatures. But a thought that must give us even greater joy and consolation is this, that Christ is our King by acquired as well as by natural right, for he is our Redeemer. Would that they who forget what they have cost their Savior might recall the words, you were not redeemed with corruptible things, but with the precious blood of Christ, as of a lamb unspotted and undefiled. We are no longer our own property, for Christ has purchased us with a great price. Our very bodies are the members of Christ. And then he goes on to talk about how this universal dominion of the Redeemer is to basically move out into the social sphere as his rights expand not just over individuals but over all societies. So you can see here that in the order of justice, Pius XI is saying he has dominion over the social order, the political order, in two ways. One, because he's the creator. John chapter 1.
Mm-hmm.
John chapter 1, he owns the house. You can't kick a guy out of his house. He owns the house. He owns the property. He's got the deed. He's got the permit. The God raising Jesus from the dead was the pink slip to the car. It's like, I'm the owner. That's why he comes back and says, all authority on earth has been given to me.
Mm-hmm.
If he has all authority, then you owe him something. If a father says, I have authority in this house, that what corresponds to a right is a duty. If he has a right, you have a duty to respect him when you step on his property. If Jesus has authority and a right, the right to all authority, then there's a corresponding duty. And that's what Pius XI is trying to get across here. But also, he says, he also has it by the fact that he suffered and died and defeated Satan to rescue us.
Mm-hmm.
So he's our hero.
Like what any good king does is they fight and die for their nation.
Exactly. So now he has it in a twofold sense. He's acquired that right. He was crowned Christ the King over his head by Pilate while they were tearing his flesh off.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, well, I mean, I agree with Pilate and you know, the Pharisees and Sadducees. He's not really king. It's like, no, if you're a Christian, you believe that the whole point of God raising Jesus from the dead was to affirm the very title that is above his head.
Yep.
All authority has been given to me. He actually is. They crucified the Lord of glory.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of, there's more I could say, but that's kind of the thing that I think is going to challenge a lot of people. And I think that, you know, Pius XI says that the salvation, not just of the individual, I love that line, it says the salvation in him is the salvation, not just of the individual, but of all society. And that's the solution. So it's kind of like Mary and Martha. I was thinking about this because a couple weeks ago we had the Mary and Martha thing.
Mass reading.
Yeah, and I was listening to Bishop Barron talk about Mary and Martha. And I was like, I feel like Jesus, I kind of got in prayer, Jesus saying to America, like, America, America, you are busy with many things. You know, you're bombing Iran. You're supplying weapons to Ukraine. You're tariffing everybody to, you know, like you're doing a lot of things, a lot of good things. And I think Jesus probably say a lot of bad things too. You're busy with many things, says, but you just have one thing to do. Crown me as king.
Yep.
And that's what the anointing was, right? The anointing of Jesus was the anointing of the Messiah, the Messianic king, which is what she was doing. And it's like, you busy yourself with many things, America, but you have one thing to do. And it's to recognize Christ the King and his kingdom on earth, the Catholic Church, his ambassador, the Pope and the bishops and stuff like that. So there's that. I mean, all of justice flows from that. And if you don't give God his due, then nobody in the house is going to be respected in all sorts of rights. We're not going to treat each other with dignity and respect. Once you see that the way you treat this other person is the way you're going to, is how you're treating Jesus himself, the Lord of the universe, we're playing a different ballgame rather than pretending everybody has dignity. And when we don't really have a foundation, there's no foundation to it.
Going though with this but shifting into this charismatic and traditional movement, I think this is a good time to bring it up. There needs to be unity, right?
Yeah.
Like it used to be, oh, you're Catholic, I'm Catholic, awesome. Like, and now we have common ground. But now it's, oh, you're Catholic?
What kind?
What kind of Catholic are you?
Yeah.
Oh, you're charismatic. Yeah, I'm out. I'm like, nope, no thanks. Want nothing to do with you. And I only bring this up because I do think justice can help people who maybe lean one way over the other to come to unify our church again, because they're the same way that we're not recognizing in politics that Christ is king or the dignity of a person, right? Where we're somehow, whether we're charismatic or traditional, looking at the other side and being like, I'm better than you, and like not recognizing the dignity or the fact that they love God or that you can respect like like how they live their faith or whatever. And that there's a lack of unity and now everything is critical and everything is and we've lost like that point.
Yeah, I'd say that. I guess kind of hitting on that. I kind of just want to go back to like Vatican II, where the church, you know, I feel like everyone's always like, that's where it lost its tradition was after Vatican II.
Yeah.
But I was reading in the Catechism, it's the last sentence of paragraph 1124 in the beginning of 1125. Liturgy is a constitutive element of the holy and living tradition. For this reason, no sacramental rite may be modified or manipulated at the will of the minister or the community. So, like, with all of that, I guess my thought is what should then the liturgy and sacramental rites and all that kind of stuff, like, if we could go back and, like, see exactly what they intended with shifting of the mass, like Novus Ordo and all that kind of stuff, I feel like some, like, mass feels so relaxed in the sense we're clapping hands and singing Kumbaya during mass. It's like, where's the the respect and the reverence.
And giving what feels like giving God what is owed to him, right?
Yes.
This is absolutely on the topic of, the highest form of the justice we can give back to God is not just to write him in Article 1 of California's state constitution, Jesus Christ is all authority. It's actually the Mass.
Yeah.
The Mass is the highest form of honoring and worshiping God the way he's asked. And that includes all the other stuff that flows from it, which is the social rights of Christ the King and everything. But the Mass is what he has, the King has commanded us to do. Do this in remembrance of me. It's like, okay, whoa, that's the most important thing. So when it's treated willy-nilly, the church is getting at, something has gone wrong.
Right.
Now, where you place the blame is where you're going to end up in probably one of these camps. If you're charismatic, it might be like, well, it's the heart that needs to change. It's internally, it needs to be an outpouring of the Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If you're a trad, it's going to be the structure needs to go back. We need to, we need to change the structure. And we need to go back to the justice of God, because at the end of the day, the person in charge of how he's going to be worshipped is Jesus of Nazareth. Okay, that's the key thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if Jesus says we can have drums in Mass, then he's the king. If Jesus also says no drums, Gregorian chant, and everyone better be kneeling,
Yeah.
then we need to do it like that, because he's the king. We could pretend to have direct access to Jesus through a vision or something like that, but you risk basically deluding yourself. I saw an angel when really it was like Satan, like in the case with probably Muhammad and Joseph Smith. But Jesus has set up specific Spirit-empowered ambassadors, the Pope and the bishops, those who hear you, hear me. And it wasn't that the laity would be one. The prayer at the Last Supper was that they would be one, the bishops.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a schism if we leave the church. It's a schism if a bishop does, because Jesus' prayer, high priestly prayers for the bishops to be one, because they're his vassals. So what is owed to God is what is owed to Jesus, the king, is to be lockstep with his ambassadors. Because you can't appeal beyond an appeal to a pope. No one can judge the pope, as the church teaches. So you can judge the decisions, like some of the prudential decisions and stuff like that, but you have to be careful at how you respond publicly and tone and stuff like that. But suffice to say, you want to try to give what is Jesus' due, which is, if there's an ecumenical council of the world's bishops and they call for a reformation of the liturgy, sure, a later pope or a later council could go back to that earlier form of the Mass, but you have no other access to discern the spirit of the times than looking at the Pope and the bishops, who are the guardians of the tradition. They're the guardians of the church. And at the end of the day, Jesus is the one that's going to have to fix all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I'm saying Jesus can fix it. I like Vatican II. I do like the liturgical reforms, especially the lectionary. So the Spirit-empowered popes and ambassadors had discerned that something needed to change. Because remember, back up real quick. A lot of people do fault the Novus Ordo for, being the collapse of Catholicism, whatever that actually means. But remember, we just had all of Christendom give Jesus and his church the middle finger, and they were all Latin Mass going Catholics. Napoleon, Hitler, who else? All of the princes. Latin Mass Catholics did not care, refused, they embraced liberal progressivism, and right. So you're not going to say, well, it's the Latin Mass that caused that,
right? But
I think the church rightly discerned the laity are not being as well formed. They need to be properly formed, and they saw some of the liturgical reforms as a way to do that. So, I guess to tie in justice. Well, first of all, giving God his due is also honoring the traditional Mass.
Right.
What we call the 1962 Missal, or the form that our ancestors worshipped for a long time, worshipped the way they worshipped for a long time. And honoring that is really important. But ultimately what Jesus established in Matthew 16 was not a form of the liturgy. If he established the papacy, where we have the living tradition there. So, the obedience that is owed to the Pope is supreme in his power. So he can reform the liturgy however he wants.
Yeah.
And that's what's owed to Jesus and the church.
Well, that, but also even just going off of, if you prefer the Latin Mass or you prefer Novus Ordo, you prefer maybe a little bit more of like a charismatic Mass. Ultimately, justice in this area is reflecting to yourself, like, whether you're charismatic or traditional, that your worship glorifies God and that it's not about you or personal preference. It's not about your feelings or what you think is right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a matter of, is it worshiping God, and does it bring you closer to him? And
I think also when you're in Mass, reflecting on yourself of like, am I worthy to receive him? And am I going to receive him reverently?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Out of justice for him.
Yeah.
I think both the traditionalists and the charismatics, what's great about them is that they understand the reality of God. It's like charismatics will just go up to someone on the street and just pray over them and believe that Jesus can heal their broken leg in a matter of seconds. Or they believe the Spirit is there present with them, and they just this reality of God has hit them in such a way that they are moved in such a way to act a certain way that you're like, wow, you really believe this whole thing is true, don't you? Like, you really think this person, by praying over them or praying for something, God's going to move mountains, It's like, wait a second, that actually sounds like Jesus and sounds like you actually believe. But then you also have the traditionalists, they're called, they go to Latin Mass and we're like, wait a second. They challenge people in the church. It's like, if this is really Jesus Christ, present body, blood, soul, and divinity, and you're receiving him like on the hand and nonchalantly, and you're distracted, there's no reverence, like, what in the world are you doing? So you look at the traditionalist that's like, this isn't about my feelings. I want to worship God in the most reverent way possible, because we're talking about the body, blood, soul, and divinity of the person that God just gave all authority on earth to. So you can see, like, there's that tension. There's always been that tension throughout the church.
Yeah.
Of different ways of trying to honor God best, because these people are soaked in the reality of God, like Luther was. Pope Benedict talks about how Luther was just someone captivated with the justice of God and with the love of God, and he had this great faith in God. He just did it the wrong way. But I mean, that's a radical case. It's not like the Catholic charismatic and TLM crowd, because he broke away in a radical way. But also, you see some people do break away.
I mean, you've
got in both sides.
You do, because like you brought up the SSPX before, and you're bringing up Vatican II, and I mean, this could get us like pretty off topic, but it's like you're bringing that up, and it's some of them believe that the last true pope was Pope Pius X. And so because of that, it's like, well, then they don't even believe that Vatican II is valid, or that Pope St. John Paul II is even a valid pope or a saint.
Yeah.
They don't believe in any of these things. And like, that's where it's like, well, that's crazy, and it's disordered. And that's the thing, is like, whether you fall into a charismatic side or a traditional side, whatever, you need to be ordered. And that's in anything in life, right? You need to order your thoughts, order your action, it's God first. And that's it. Your emotions and feelings about whatever can come after that. But when we put that above our love of God, or what we owe to God, I feel like that's where then that people get extremely prideful, and it gets twisted, because they're sitting there thinking, I love God and I want the ultimate reverence for him, and after Pope Pius X, it went downhill from there. God said the gates of hell will not prevail.
Yeah.
So you need to take a step back and like realize you're not greater than God. He cares about his church more than you care about his church. Like, there's a disorder there in your thought process and and all of
Yeah,
that.
and are you sacrificing and praying more than you're just talking?
Yeah.
And gossiping and
Yeah.
like that sort of thing. But I think that's a great perspective, Rachel. I mean, that's what I take. Say, okay, well, this is your church. This is your thing. So I'm not going to go to hell. This is a tough situation. I'm going to trust you, Jesus. I'm going to stay united to your church. And you know, he has specific warnings for the people in leadership, but ultimately it's the work of the Spirit. And you do the abandonment to divine providence sort of thing, right? Okay, this is Jesus' church, and he allows certain things to happen, and whatever. We'll see. You know.
Yeah. Then moving on to justice in relationships.
Yeah. I mean, justice and relationships are like tied together, like I said earlier.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because like you've hit on, obviously we've hit on like the politics and like authority in that sense, and we briefly hit on how we owe our parents, right? I guess we could just kind of touch base on that again, starting with parents and you, as a child, what you owe your parent, and then kind of move into marriage and stuff like that. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
I think this part of it is going to make justice feel like kind of
almost like a little more tangible.
More tangible, and to be okay, how can I live
it daily?
Because
like in my relationships with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you'll recall that J.D. Vance caused a storm to stir on the national and a little bit on the international stage because Cardinal Prevost, who's now Pope Leo XIV, even, responded to it, where he cited Augustine. He talks about the ordo amoris, the order of love. And you love those things that are, those people that are most they're closest to you.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy in the Screwtape letters. What Screwtape's trying to do is he's trying to get his patient to fall in love with humanity rather than to do what Jesus said, which is to fall in love with your neighbor, right? Because falling in love with humanity is easy. You're like, oh, come on, help me raise money for this person all the way in the eastern part of the globe, and I don't know them, but I know they must be suffering, whatever, and I'm going to give money to that, or I'm going to raise a voice for them, rather than the neighbor next door who's really getting mad because, your grandkids are removing rocks from their thing, or they're, and you're like trying to love them as best you can, or your sister-in-law Rachel, who's really annoying. No, just kidding.
Yeah.
Or they say something. It's like it's easier to fall in love with humanity than it is your neighbor. But Jesus commanded us to love our neighbor. So, starting locally, like it's hardest to love. It's easiest, but it's also hardest to love the person that's living in the same house. Your brothers, your sisters, and stuff. And then you go from there. I owe something to these people in this house that I don't owe.
That person across the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Or even the person next door.
You kind of move out from that.
You can have the parent who's happy to see everyone else, and then they come home and they're like the worst version of themselves.
Yeah,
like
exactly. That's a good point.
What is that?
Yeah, that's a good point.
What kind of person are you?
Yeah,
because it's your family that you should love most, or try to be the best version of yourself for.
Yeah, exactly. That's really good.
Yeah,
that's really good. Yeah.
So moving into parenting real quick here, like I wrote down a couple bullet points under each topic of what would be like examples of justice in the relationship. So if you're a parent, I'm not one, so feel free to add in or correct me. But justice in parenting is not treating each kid equal, right? So, the one kid, their love language is physical touch, and the other kid doesn't care about that but wants quality time. No matter how many times you hug them that day, they're not going to feel loved. They're going to be, I just want to talk to you. But if you're not making the time for them in that sense, then that's not justice. So justice in parenting would look like, I think, making sure you're loving each child in the way that that makes them feel loved.
Are you calling me out right now? No, just kidding.
No, actually, you're really good at this. We talked about this with in our motherhood episode with Becca. You came up. So yeah, and how you're really good at making sure that each kid is it's like you'll ask the question, all right, who are you struggling with, or who's flying under your radar right now? And if it's the same kid for you both, you're like, all right, Can you pour into this kid this week?
Yeah.
And that's beautiful. But that's where I was just about to say that this isn't something that means that you have to like every day be like, this kid I hug you, this kid I talk to, this kid I, like
Yeah.
it's a matter of just making sure that you're actually loving the people in your home the way that they need to be loved.
Well, and I think going all the way back to, and you're good at what I'm about to say right now, is being attentive to the what other people need. Because you might say you love them and then you're like, I'm sorry, I didn't realize like you needed help with this, or I didn't know you needed this. And I think being always outwardly, going back to what we said at the beginning, justice is an outward facing virtue. Like if you're closed in on yourself and you're selfish, you can't be attentive to the needs of others and give them what they need. So you have to constantly be thinking, okay, life is not about me. Like all of the days I have in this day are about making sure I take care of myself so that I can give of myself, but I need to spend my life giving of myself. And you see some of these lifestyles that people are living where it's just all about them. And then you see a total collapse when they enter into marriage. Where they're just living single lives, doing everything for themselves. And then it can't even, they get into marriage and they have a kid and they're just like, they have like a mental breakdown. They're like,
your life is not your own anymore.
It's like
right?
You can't do fantasy football, or you can't like go to your friend's thing every week. You have these new people that you've entered into a relationship with. And so I think you need the other virtues, right? You need the discipline in order to give of yourself, to give what people deserve, to give.
And this quote keeps popping in my mind of Mother Teresa saying, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family.
Yeah.
Like that is justice. Love your family. Love your neighbor. Love who's actually in your life day to day that you go home to, and not just the stranger on the street.
I know.
Don't just hand the $20 to the homeless guy and then you close the window and then you're screaming at your kids because you're the one who wants to sit on your phone at the light and you can't hear the video you want to watch. What is that? What are you doing?
Yeah.
That's disordered.
Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Yeah. So that's just one thing I wrote. I also just wrote about consistent discipline. Following through in discipline, but also disciplining your child. Discipline is love. Disciplining your kids. It's in the Bible. It's in the catechism. It's necessary. You're
teaching them to have the justice to get so that they can freely give of themselves.
Yeah.
You're like, you got to be good here because you need to say thank you. I honestly think that's like such a big thing to teach kids, is just like say thank you and be grateful. And that gets them out of themselves. Like maybe they're too young to do the dishes or unload the dishes, but teaching them to just look at the person who made dinner and say thank you. Like, go and say thank you. You're not big enough to help contribute in this, that, and this way. And but right now what you can give is like your heart to really appreciate and say the words, thank you, communicate to the person that you are grateful because they gave you something that was of themselves.
That's actually a really good point, because I've never really thought about saying thank you in this way, but when a parent corrects a child and is like, no, say it again. And they're like, why? And they're like, why? I just said it. It's like, no, look them in the eye and say the words thank you and mean it. They're like, why? Why is it mad? I already said thank you. But it's in that moment that you're like actually calling them to recognize the dignity of the person who just did something for you. And then also force them to look out of themselves and acknowledge this person and acknowledge what they did. Whether they're not thinking of it that in depth, but like that eye contact, that matters. That stuff matters. So that's actually really cool. That's a good example. Yeah. So then moving into children towards parents, and I just want to say I think that your perspective on this stuff is actually really good on this children toward parents, because you went through a phase of, as an adult child, you still owe your parent, you still owe them honor, and that I just remember you talking about how we need to, we should take care of our parents better than we do. And I was like, huh? Why? They're doing fine, or they can still do stuff like, because it's so easy to be like, oh, a child owes the parent honor and respect when they're under their roof.
Mm.
But okay, now we're all adults here. How do you show your parent honor and respect? And that, I think, is a hard thing. So
Yeah. That can be tough.
Yeah.
That can be tough because the relationship is changing a little bit.
Yep.
Because now you have primary obligations to possibly other people, like a husband. Now you're under your husband's authority.
Mm-hmm.
So you're primarily obedient to him over your father. And then as an adult, as kids get older, the relationship changes, right?
Mhm.
Because you don't discipline them the same. You can't just like spank your kid like until he's like 18, or you can't like say, hey, go put your nose in the corner for saying that. And he's like 21 years old, right? It changes. So as reason grows, because the will has to be activated by the intellect, so you have to, at 8, you have to start appealing to the intellect and say, here are the reasons why you should do this, rather than just, initially they're little toddlers. They're
Right.
like,
Well,
they
that's
can be-
before they have.
yeah, and
reason
then you could
within
give them
them.
real consequences, like, hey, you're going to sit here in this timeout until you eat your food or something. You have to give them reasons for, now that they're 10, you say, hey, it's really important to be respectful and to eat the food on your plate because they cooked it, and it's a way of showing respect and giving back what is due to that person who cooked your meal, But they don't know that when they're so young, and so you kind of just build it into them so that when the time comes, they have the ability to actually do that. But yeah, when they get older and you're an adult, like it changes a little bit, but I think that the parent understands that as well.
Mhm.
Like the parents understand, okay, this is not the same kind of relationship, but I can give advice, but I can't like command in the same way.
I guess the part that I was thinking of besides honor or obedience, obviously there's gratitude, just genuinely saying thank you, or, on Mother's Day, Father's Day, like, even if you struggle
Yeah.
with your parent, thanking them for the life that they gave you,
Yeah.
and like the way that, like, the good parts about you came from them,
Which episode did we hit on that a lot on?
Respect, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then, but the part that I guess I maybe was kind of insinuating to you
Okay,
was like
yeah.
the support in old age.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
because we were
like,
just talking about that.
Yeah, and you kind of
last-
went through a phase when you, I think, kind of were just like, oh my gosh, I've never really thought about this, but like we owe them so much at that point.
Well, yeah, and that's what Jesus means by when the disciple comes to him and is like, well, let me bury my father, and Jesus is like, well, let the dead bury their dead. Dead bury the dead. In other words, let the other older people bury your parents, because now your allegiance is to me. That's kind of what I was saying. Like the fundamental honor your parents deserve is just rooted in the more fundamental duties toward God, right? That's why the first commandment is the first commandment. That's why Christ the King is quas primos, on first things. Because only then, if God is denied rights, if Christ is denied rights, then it's game over for everyone else,
Mhm.
And that's what we would say about the right to life, right? If you deny the right to life of the unborn, then none of us have any rights. Like,
Right.
If you don't have a right to life, you don't have a right to get a car or buy a house or whatever, private property. But when Jesus is claiming that allegiance, right? It's one of the ways in which he's claiming divine authority there. You also have Jesus calling out the Pharisees in Matthew chapter 1 to 20. It's just like the whole gospel is like him calling out the Pharisees. But there is this, it's kind of interesting because he sort of flips it on it, what I was just saying, on its head, where in chapter 50, it says, then Pharisees and scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem and said, why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat. He answered them, and why do you transgress the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition? It's like, whoa, that's intense. Because he says, for God commanded, honor your father and mother, and he who speaks evil of father and mother, let him surely die. But you say, if anyone tells his father or mother, what you would have gained from me is given to God, he need not honor his father. So for the sake of your tradition, you have made void the word of God. You hypocrites. Jesus is like coming out of the gates because they're getting mad. They come up to him and, they get in his face and they're like, your disciples don't wash their hands. And Jesus is like, don't get in my face. You guys are telling people forget this little washing your hands. Like, you need to make sure you have a couple squirts of hand sanitizer before you eat whatever before dinner. It's like, okay, that's a custom. That's a tradition. And by the way, you definitely should wash your hands before dinner. But that's not the same thing as the commandment to honor your mother and father. And you're telling people to break that commandment to honor God. So they're using that what we just said, right? Give honor to God. But it's not real honor to God, because they're saying, well, what you would give to your parents in old age, right? Honor them, save up your money, and then provide for them as they get older. You're saying, give all that money that you saved up to take care of them and put it to the temple. Give it to the temple. Give it to God. But really, the Pharisees are the ones cashing in on it. Right? So Jesus is like, you hypocrites, you're just taking the money, right? You're using the order of amors, the order of love, but you're taking all the money that was given to God and giving it whatever. But anyway, it just gets to that point of, what is the point I was making was, what does it really mean to honor your father and mother? And I think in this society, what it really meant back in the day is taking care of your parents in old age. Like, as they age, you don't just go and abandon them, you take care of them. And now because we don't have large families, we have smaller families. And so we rely more on the broader community, like Social Security, to take care of us. But the idea would be that, when my grandma got sick, my grandma had 10 kids, 9 of whom are still alive. And whenever grandma was sick, it was just, she had 9 siblings, some that were out of state that could send money to help grandma, others that were nearby that were able to help grandma, this, that, and the other. Was the whole thing of honoring your mother and father. It wasn't just like, don't bark back at your mom when she tells you to do something. It's when they get older, you take care of them.
Yeah.
And you don't like abandon them. And you see many old people that have to go to a home or something, or a neighbor, because their kids are gone. Don't take care of them.
Or they only had the one kid.
Yeah.
But that kid is still also gone and not caring.
Yeah, exactly. And the church feels that. The church, typically would take on that role of taking care of widows in old age, as Paul says. Say, hey, you guys, if their family abandons them, we don't abandon them. The church comes in, and takes care of them. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
one way to honor your mother and father.
So marriage.
Yeah. So I would say, I feel like the biggest thing in marriage would be like living the ordered life of God, spouse, children, work. It's like, obviously we hit a lot on God, but then it's like, okay, how do you take care of your spouse? So it's like that they need to come next after your faith. I'd say that's like the biggest thing in the order of justice, is taking care of them and not putting work above them. Obviously, especially as a man, it's like, okay, yes, you have to provide for your family, but are you not taking care of your wife emotionally? Are you not actually there for her? And same thing with like the wife. Are you taking care of your home and your children, but you're not sitting there loving your husband the second he walks through the door? I feel like that's a huge thing of respect. Or if you're not even loving your spouse, like everything else is disordered too, in which I feel like so many people do put work and children and other activities above their spouse, and the spouse always goes on the back burner.
Yeah.
So I would say like that'd be my first thought of justice in marriage, is actually putting your spouse first above all other aspects of life after God.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, that's good. Especially working, there are all sorts of distractions, right? Well, I'm working so much because I'm loving you. This is my form of loving you.
Right.
It's like, well, it's
but
not
then
just,
if you're not present when you're home, it's like
yeah,
okay, sure, work all the hours and everything
money
like
in the
that.
bank for groceries. I need emotional support. I need prayers and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. I wrote a couple things. Again, obviously I'm not married, but this, with that idea of the correct order.
Right.
So if you're prioritizing your spouse, what does that look like? This respect that you have for them, like you mentioned, acknowledging Kyle right when he walks in the door, right? That's a way of showing him respect. You matter.
Yeah.
This chore can wait the 30 seconds it takes to greet you.
Yes.
Orlin can cry at my feet. He's already been crying at my feet anyway. I'm going to come say hi to you.
Yep.
And I'm not going to just throw him at you and be like, can you just take him?
Right.
Like, it's, nope, you matter. This matters. And having that respect. I wrote honoring each other's dignity. I think that would just, it's taking the time to just take a moment Doug Hinderer, I think is his name. He's on Relevant Radio. But he said, if you took 1%, right? It was 1%.
1% of your day.
And to dedicate to your marriage, he goes, you know what 1% is? 15 minutes. That would change your marriage. I'm like, it's that I think that would make your spouse feel like dignified and loved and like, okay, like we actually looked each other in the eye and we talked for 15 minutes. That's nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's huge.
This is just another thing on top of the 15 minutes. I listened to this one podcast one time. It's called St. Joseph's Workshop, I think it was. And they had an episode on marriage, and this family seemed to be like a normal, healthy family. You know, husband gets home from work and, you know, has wife and kids and all that kind of stuff. And they do dinner and they put the kids to bed, and then they have their, like their spousal quality time.
Yeah.
But they had a counselor come in and basically just observe their family for some time. One of their issues was that they couldn't get their kids to stop coming into bed with them. And the counselor had told them, your kids need to see you guys have that quality time. So you need to have at least your 15 minutes of quality time before putting your kids to bed. And the kids stopped coming into their bed after they started having quality time that the kids could see. So the kids need to see mom and dad enjoying each other, and they won't feel that need to like be present with both of them throughout the night.
Whoa.
Isn't that crazy?
Fascinating. Yeah.
So it's like,
I have to think about that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So it's like making sure that your kids see you loving each other.
It makes sense
Or
though, because
scrap the quality time and just lock their doors. Like,
you're hilarious.
But it's like they can still be like sitting around and playing, but like they need to see mom and dad loving each other and like talking to each other and
being interrupted every 5 seconds while they're trying to
exactly. Exactly.
It's like mom and dad are having quality time. Okay, go outside, ride a bike for the next 15 minutes, please.
Right.
Yeah.
I am locking the door from the inside now.
Watch us through the window.
Watch
while we talk.
Yeah.
While we it's so funny.
But I mean, it doesn't have to mean like, you know, sitting there holding hands and talking for 15 minutes, but it could be like, okay, we're making dinner together, and we're going to do something together.
Yep.
And they're going to see us interact in a loving way.
Yep.
Yeah,
like I think stuff like that is.
Oh, and it makes sense that it would affect the kid that way because if God has an order, like a natural order to things,
right?
That being part of it,
it would make sense.
Yeah, the kid that way.
Exactly.
Oh, so much, like psychological stability to see your parents enjoy each other, love each other.
Yeah.
You know, have like a dad who's a strong presence, a calm, strong presence, a mom who is gentle and loving and caring and anticipating your needs, and a dad also who is playful, and then is playful with the mom. Like the mom, like for a kid to see all of that, it's just very like relaxing and
it is
a healthy human being who's being formed because they feel safe in that environment. You know, good.
I thought I deleted this section on justice of friendship. You have the same paper as me. That's the only one I'm saying it. But truly, if you want to know how to have justice in friendship, go listen to our friendship episode. It would be everything that I say in that.
Yeah.
For me, but bullet pointed, it's honesty, it's encouraging virtue, it's calling each other out, and paying attention to somebody's needs.
Yeah.
That's that.
Yeah. Friendship is one of the highest spiritual goods. It's really important.
If you want to know, like this one is actually one that could go on for a while, which is why I was like, go listen to our friendship episode.
Yeah.
Because like it's like definitely one you can deep dive into.
Yeah.
So I'm not brushing it over because it's not important. There actually is a lot to it. So just bullet pointed. It's like
you have to figure out what kind of friendship you have with somebody.
Yep.
And then that determines what you owe them.
Yep.
You know,
that's a good point.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
That's what I'm saying is that you have to figure out in your mind, according to Aristotle's 3 categories of friendship or whatever other categories you want to come up with. This is what I owe this person.
Yep.
Right. You guys are so close. Your friendship is really important, and you've established a relationship. You guys both are on mission. You have a podcast. All that stuff, even the podcast that you guys have, is take into account when you categorize this kind of friendship that I have is not the same kind of friendship I have with somebody else, even though I see them regularly, and that means that we know it instinctually, like more is owed to this friendship than the other friendship, or a mere acquaintance, like, hang out, I see you every now and then, but I'm not going to.
Or to like the coworker friend or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So determining that relationship, that friendship is going to determine what you owe them and what they owe you,
Yeah. 100%.
And you also, you also might categorize it different than they would. So all of a sudden they're like, feel like you owe them something. And you're like, oh, I thought we were an acquaintance. I didn't realize it was that.
I didn't realize I was that kind of a person to you.
Yeah, that kind of friendship and
that's true.
that relationship, because people categorize the relationship differently. And so they have different expectations as to what is owed. And so that's where you kind of get in some trouble. You read into certain things.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Yeah. The next one was enemies. Because Jesus commands us to love our enemies. And so how do you love your enemy in a just way?
Well, if they've wronged you, if they've wronged you, you forgive them, because it's basically rooted in Jesus' command. Jesus says to forgive your enemies. And he says it's because it's what I've done. So the king has done this in the order of what he thinks in his mind, justice is mercy. He has this relationship with us where even before, as Paul says, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And he categorized that in Romans 5 as an enemy. We were God's enemies, and he died for us. And so he felt like, he didn't owe it in the strict justice, it's charity. But when you become a Christian, now what is owed in the strict sense is actually forgiveness and grace and mercy, because that's what's been given to us. So if it's been given to us, the king tells us to give it to other people. So in the order of justice to him, you owe forgiveness and love and grace and mercy to your enemy. But you don't have to like forget that they're like you're a bad person.
Right.
And it's not the same relationship as like a friend or anything. But when they become Catholic, or they become Christian in general or Catholic, and they're in the body of Christ, that's a different kind of relationship. That's also another thing to remember, that we didn't talk about it, but we owe more to our fellow Catholics across the globe than we do our fellow American citizens. And that's challenging to think about. And Paul applied that in some radical ways in the New Testament. Like, this member is now in the body of Christ. They're not in the old image. They're in the new image of Christ. So you have a greater relationship and allegiance to a baptized Catholic who crosses the border, right, than you do to an American citizen who's not baptized at all. That is challenging.
That's interesting.
That is interesting.
That is challenging. Yeah. And they're a member of the body of Christ. Now, maybe they're not because they're mortal sin. And if they cross the border, they're probably in if you don't know the state of someone's soul, maybe they're no longer united to Christ, whatever. But I think it's just to remember that we have a greater relationship, a more important relationship to fellow Christians and Catholics than someone who's not, because we're in a community with them. We're in the redeemed. We're in the new creation.
So just hypothetically speaking, say somebody comes over the border, we happen to meet them, and they're like trying to stay here, but you could see that they're clearly trying to live their faith. Well, then I'll take you in and we'll help you get the right steps to becoming a citizen.
Right.
That would be like essentially our justice to this person.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? So owe them this, because it's like, okay, you're not a citizen, but you're a part of my church. But if you're also a genuine Catholic, you'd think that they would try to live here properly then, if they're trying to cross the border and come in here and live here.
Yeah, if they broke the laws, as a good Catholic, you'd be like, hey, like, our Lord is, the church has laws. The king has laws about the boundaries, and you can't cross over and break the laws of a nation. So in the order of justice,
let's do this the right way.
Yeah, exactly.
But I will help you because...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're called to even love those that are not baptized. I think it's just to remember that when we gather on Sunday, whether it's an illegal, it's someone who's not an American citizen or someone who is an American citizen, there is an allegiance among that community of believers that we owe one another that is different. We're in a different relationship with our fellow baptized members of Christ.
Yeah.
And Paul has all sorts of things like that. Like he says, don't sue. He's like, why are you guys suing each other? You know, it's like, you can't sue each other. Like, he's like, so you were wronged? Better to allow yourself to be wronged and lose whatever that person stole from you than to publicly undermine the union of the nations that Christ has fulfilled in gathering people from all around the nations and giving off this idea that we are opposed to one another and so on and so forth. Paul makes this argument, but I think that it's just important to remember that we are all in Christ's new creations, and that means something. I don't know exactly practically how that all works.
Yeah.
But that is something to think about and contemplate. What does that mean for me to be in a different relationship with Catholics across the world? And that means something more important than just the relationship I have with our fellow citizens, even though that's important too. You owe justice to your fellow citizens.
Yeah, I love that. Cool.
Yeah, like here he says in Galatians 6, if I could just, I'm just going to hit on this point because Paul talks about this text just came to mind in Galatians 6. If you want to turn there, you can. He says, oh man, verse 10. So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all men, and especially to those who are of the household of faith. It's like, what are you talking about? There's an order of Morris, and that the household of faith is the highest. Is like, because
Makes
we're talking
sense.
family. We're not, and even more than our natural family.
Yeah.
You know, if our natural family has abandoned Christ or is not baptized or whatever, it's like we have a greater, more real relationship with the supernatural family than a family that member that's no longer in Christ or is not in Christ.
Wow.
It's something
that's cool.
It's something to think about. Yeah. I mean, people speculate that even that's what happened to Paul, you know, that Paul was married and that the thorn in the flesh that was his suffering was his wife that abandoned him.
Oh, wow.
That we don't hear about in the letters. But some scholars have speculated, like, if you could ask one question to Paul, it was like, was it a wife? Was it your, like, love that you had lost that you sacrificed for Christ? Was that the thorn in the flesh, or was it like legitimate? Was it like your eyesight? Some people's, because he alludes to not being able to see very well. Was it your eyesight? Was it the fact that you stumbled over your words, as he tells the Corinthians, or like what was it? But some people say that it might have been part of the family that he had, the relationships that he had lost. He had lost many relationships for the sake of that one relationship.
Yeah.
You know, not just a career. People talk about, well, he chucked over a career, a very like lucrative career as a Pharisee. Well, it's just not the career. It's he lost his friends.
Yeah.
He went back to Tarsus and all his buddies are like, dude, don't talk to us. His family, possibly a wife. He lost everything for the sake of what he calls the dikaiosunetheo, the righteousness of God, what is owed to God now in Israel's Messiah, Jesus. So, and then he appeals to Rome to go tell Caesar Jesus is Lord. And that's the ultimate justice in his mind, you know? So anyways, sometimes you sacrifice certain relationships for the sake of other, but that's just something to throw out there. I don't know all the practical implications, but Paul there hints at it, right? Do good to all men, but especially those of the household of faith.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that you should be very attentive to Catholics, to our fellow Catholics, our fellow Christians, and make sure that they're being taken care of. Like, do good. Yeah, so I'm just repeating myself, but something to think about.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, then, since you said people want to ask Paul one question if they could, Chris, we're going to ask you one question since we can. To close us out, if you could just summarize for people, what is like the one thing that you would want people to take away on the virtue of justice?
I would say that if our justice is not properly ordered to God, then justice will not.
There is no justice.
There is no. Well,
I guess there could be, but
it's that's the highest justice that we owe everything to God. That first commandment is everything. It grounds all the other justices or injustices that are outlined in the 10 commandments. The bottom 9 flow from the number 1, and that I would say take that away and think about really how that might play into your relationship with friends, family, and society. That are your relationships rooted in giving justice back to God? That at the heart of our relationships, which are determined by justice or justice determined by relationship, there has to be God. And so if he's being undermined by a relationship, ultimately it's an injustice, So just remember that all of the rights that we have, that we owe to one another, the duties, they all just flow from the fact that we owe everything to God. And that's the proper ordering, both individually and societally, in society. And as Jesus tries to explain as best as he can, he takes precedence over everything. And I remember as a kid, struggling with this idea that unless we love you more than mother and father, we're not worthy of you. Like, what? And now, years later, I'm thinking to myself, oh, that's the proper ordering. And it's not so that we don't love our parents. It's that so we can more properly love our parents and love those around us. That if God's rights are undermined, then all the rights and relationships we have are not properly grounded in the truth.
Yep.
Love it. And I'm going to skip an examination for tonight because I don't think there needs to be, because justice is the crown to all virtue.
Yeah.
And there is no need to have a in-depth examination on this virtue alone. Everything that Chris just said is what you need to reflect upon. What is the order in your life? Where do you put God in relationship to parents, to family, to friends, to society, and all of that?
Yep, I agree.
So thank you, Chris, for joining us tonight. It was a pleasure having you. Really glad this worked out.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Yeah.
Girls.
And and we will link everything in the show notes that you can find: Chris's YouTube, his Patreon, his Twitter, not Twitter now, it's X, whatever. He's on a couple different platforms. His content's awesome. I highly recommend it. And
if you want to sign up for Bible studies too, you can find that on Patreon. I do Bible studies once a week, typically Thursdays, and then book studies on Wednesdays and stuff like that if they want to join the group.
Yeah, and if this didn't convince you that he knows this stuff, then sign up so you can be convinced.
Exactly.
So, and not only check out his Patreon, check out our Patreon. We would love your support. Leave us a rate and review. That is super helpful for people finding our podcast. Share it. Email us if you have a question or a topic you want us to cover. And until next time,
bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Wannabe Saints podcast.
If you have a question or topic you would like us to cover, reach out to us at wannabesaintspodcast@gmail.com or on Instagram at wannabe_saints.
You can find the link in our show notes.
Thanks for listening, and God bless.